Welcome to the village. So today my guest co-host is Mary again. If you remember her from the culinary medicine episodes that we had. Hi, Mary.
Hi.
Nice to be with you in New York City again.
Nice to be with you again. Thanks for having me back.
Thanks for joining me today. People feel like it's beating a dead horse, but I wanted to bring some information today in maybe a different way to really educate people about the pandemic and COVID, the vaccine, and these mandates happening. We're definitely still in a pandemic situation. So given that the pandemic has not really seen its way out, it's still a huge problem and cases are rising again with variants coming up all the time. So I just wanted to educate people in a calm and productive manner and just explain why this isn't a battle. This isn't something political. You know, as physicians, we definitely didn't go into this field to fight some sort of political battle or prove that we have to be right all the time. It's not about that. It's really always has been and always will be about patient care. So I think it's important for us to tell you what we know. It's about spreading your knowledge. It's about trying to prevent disease and really morbidity, mortality. And I feel like if we didn't do that, we wouldn't be doing our job. Like, we didn't go into this thinking there'd be a pandemic, but you have to step up to whatever medicine throws at you, and it threw a pandemic at us. If we don't tell people what we know and why we know it, I mean, we studied microbiology, we studied virology, we studied pathophysiology. We did it so that when a pandemic hits, we can tell people how to stay safe. So you having worked as a pandemic in Manhattan last year's huge wave. I'll let you start with some information if you want to share.
First of all, I want to just say that I'm glad that you're taking your time out of your busy schedule from senior patients to use this platform to educate people about the vaccine, because I know that there's a lot of false information that's going around on social media. Even people like patients of mine that are sending me videos of things that they're watching online.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's also like humor to it. Yeah, this is a very important topic to talk about now, especially, with the Delta variant, that we're seeing more and more patients getting sick. Just having experienced this pandemic from last year, like you're saying, it's sort of giving me the same feeling again like it did last year, because, with the cases kind of going up, we had a little bit of a lull with people getting vaccinated from last December to earlier this year. And now we're seeing the cases rising, even here in New York City. There was a point where I was working in the hospital 3 months ago when there were really not even any COVID cases. And then we started to see about like 3 or 4 on service. But now I think that number is definitely going up. So it's really important that we talk about real fact about why vaccination is important at this point.
Since last year, it was a scary feeling. It was new, and we didn't know what was going to happen or anything about it. And that was the original variant. And now it's like we have some sort of a solution, but we can't seem to come up with a cohesive way of people to execute it. Well, because people are scared. We are in a scary world. There's a lot of scary people. There's a lot of agendas. There's a lot of politics. How are they to weed through the truth and the lies and expecting people to put something into their body? If you don't see what could happen or feel it, how are you to believe it? So I would hope that you could trust some physicians to tell you the truth about it. I think we're a trustworthy group. Yes, first of all, if you just want to explain what COVID is, like what's COVID-19, where did it come from? Well, we don't know exactly where it came from, but it's a virus, essentially.
Right. Just like other viruses that we know, like the common cold, the flu virus, it's very easily transmittable from person to person, right? Sometimes somebody might not even look sick and they can give you the virus essentially if they're in that time frame of the infection. So with COVID earlier last year, it looked very, very similar to most viruses, how they present physically when somebody gets sick with the virus, right? Like a fever, cough, shortness of breath, right? Sometimes like you get flu. Pink eye, like the flu, and then we start talking about getting the diarrhea symptoms. Essentially, most viruses That's how they behave in your body. They attach to like what we call your mucous membranes, and that's why you get a lot of the symptoms that are related to that part of your body, right? In your lungs, in your nose, in your coughing. And then you get the fever, which is, by the way, not a bad thing. A lot of people always get scared of fevers.
Yeah,
right?
especially in my population.
Your body is essentially fighting that virus when you do catch it. It's your own like body's defense system, your immune system that's causing your temperature to rise, right? So I always kind of explain it to my patients that like your military, like the cells inside your body that fight viruses are coming out and you're trying to fight this war inside to try to get rid of this virus.
Yeah, your immune system is acting the way it's supposed to and defending the body. Many times, however, if it overreacts, that's not a good thing. When your immune system acts to and gives you like the fevers and the body aches, and some of the symptoms you have are because the virus is killing cells. Some of the symptoms you have is because your immune system is bringing out this inflammation, which it's supposed to attack the virus, but then your cells can be at attack because of that also. So if your immune system overreacts to a virus, any pathogen, any microbe, because we have viruses, bacteria, fungi, parasites,
Right.
COVID-19 in particular is a virus, like the flu virus is a virus. You can have things like blood clot, then you could have more inflammation in your lungs, so it could be hard to breathe because of various reasons. Basically because there's a war in your body.
Exactly. And this is why COVID-19, when this started last year, was very unique and sort of puzzling to us as clinicians because people were coming in presenting like they were getting sick with the flu, but it was just a lot worse. Like the level of severity was worse. And so that's when we started to see that these patients were really having a difficult time breathing and their oxygen levels were coming down. It's sort of what you're alluding to, which is this virus was so unique in the sense that when you got sick with it, your body's immune system sort of got overloaded and really wanted to fight this virus, and it kind of brought out its best defenses, right? So there was like this cytokine surge that was happening in patients. When you have your different branches of the military, right? You've got your army, your like Marines and the Navy. And so that came out and they just couldn't fight this virus. And most of the time, viruses, as you know, your body can recover from a virus, right? When you get sick with the cold or the flu, you don't necessarily need any medications, right? You sort of have to just rest and let your body take care of itself. But with COVID, that's not what was happening, right? We were seeing patients getting really sick. It was because of that, because your immune system was bringing out the big guns, the different branches of it was like the Navy SEALs were coming out, right? Really trying to attack this virus to get rid of it. They just, they couldn't because it was that different of a virus. And so this is why people were getting hospitalized. This is why people were getting sick, and some of them unfortunately dying, right?
Yeah. Older, younger, it didn't seem to matter. And it doesn't seem to matter even more now. Many people say, and this is a great way to think, my immune system will take care of it. I eat healthy. That's great. And that is what we should always strive for. We should have a good, strong immune system because health is priceless. But sometimes it's not enough for something like a virus where it's a brand new type of coronavirus.
Yeah, I mean, the coronavirus, as you know, existed before it even became COVID, right? So, especially being a pediatrician, you see coronaviruses in kids all the time, common cold in kids in the summer. And so this was like a mutation of that particular virus that unfortunately really attacks your body and on a different level.
Yeah, when we first heard about this back in January, February of 2020, I remember my sister warning me about it, and she was very much like, oh, I think I'm going to have to cancel my trip to see you in New York. And I was poo-pooing her. I was like, what are you talking about? It's coronavirus. Like, coronavirus is like old as the hills. What are you talking about? And I apologized to her a couple months later. So I was like, all right, every trip is canceled for the entire year. And a lot of people are getting sick. And the CDC statistics to date, there's been, in the United States, over 30 million cases, over 500,000 deaths. In the world, over 4 million cases and over 200 million deaths. So it's no joke. Why it's so aggressive? It's an aggressive virus. And some viruses just genetically, all of life has genetics and genes. We all have DNA. DNAs are basic building blocks of what kind of proteins we're going to make and what kind of cells we're going to have. And every living being has this. That includes humans, that includes plants, and that includes viruses. Viruses are created and mutate all the time. They're always mutating because it's hard to follow an exact genetic code. So the virus isn't doing it on purpose. It's not like a living person walking around saying it's going to do something. It just does it. In essence, it's living, but it needs to depend on something else to keep living and keep expanding its genetic material. And that's why viruses need us. So in order to stay strong and keep its own genetic material going, it needs to go from body to body. So say it kills a person, it no longer has that body to use to create its genetic material. So it has to go to the next body, and that's why it spreads. So then it keeps using our bodies until there's no bodies left to use anymore.
Well, yeah, I love that point that you're saying that, it needs bodies, and this is essentially how a pandemic happened because it spread to all these people. It was just something we couldn't control when it surged last year. We are now more people in the world, and we're overpopulating. Why it spreads easily, and that's why it's still spreading. And this is why we're having this conversation today about what is one way we can prevent that spread from person to person.
Yeah, and I didn't want to be having this conversation in almost September of 2021. I wanted us to be normal. We're seeing more of a fear now because now we're seeing more and more kids infected. Kids were infected before, but now we're dealing with a virus that has mutated. I listened to some YouTube videos by Shane Crotty. He's a immunologist in Southern California. He's done a lot of the research for this virus. Listening to these scientists explain what these viruses do. Viruses, they always mutate because our genetic material mutates too. Mutate mean instead of having their DNA one way, they flip around and their DNA is another way. Most of the time when they mutate, it can make it weaker or it can just make it die out in one way or the other. But many times it will mutate in such a way that it becomes stronger, especially when it sees a population that it's using to continue to create itself, and it sees that that population is trying to get rid of it. It will try to get stronger until eventually it's gone. So it can go one of two ways. I think people have heard of herd immunity. So people have heard of herd immunity because it's how previous pandemics have ended.
Pretty much how the Spanish flu ended.
Yeah, naturally using herd immunity is not a good idea. And how that works would be if there was enough variants and it killed enough people, and then there wasn't any more people to infect and kill. So then the virus is basically done with us. So it ravages us as a population, then it's done. Herd immunity.
Yeah.
Second way is to vaccinate enough people. People are getting mad because there's more rules and regulations about vaccinating. I think it's unfair. What have you heard about constitutional rights? And
yeah, that's all I've been hearing is that one, it still doesn't work. And I've actually had staff members who I work with in healthcare say to me, I don't need to get vaccinated because there's vaccinating people who are still getting sick with COVID. And they're like, I'm healthy. I don't need to get it. So those are some of the things I've been hearing.
Now, why is that really not helpful? I think the problem is that we're looking at this as individual, but we are so connected as a human population. That's why one virus can jump from person to person because we are connected. We have the same organs. We have the same way our body does things.
Right.
There's no guarantee that someone completely healthy won't get really sick and die. It's happened a lot. I think there's mistrust. Why wouldn't you just get the vaccine if you know that it's highly recommended? And if the medical professionals and the scientists are saying that this is the way to stop the pandemic, why wouldn't you do it? Well, people don't know the history of vaccines. I read this book, which I really recommend if you want to read about vaccine history, is Polio, an American Story. And it breaks down for you. In this country, there's people our grandparents' age or younger who can tell you about polio. Surprising that we don't seem to care about it anymore because we are the victims of our own success. That's the quote.
Yeah.
So we've become so successful as a human race in ridding ourselves of polio, somewhat measles, but smallpox.
Smallpox, yeah.
People never even heard of smallpox. Like, who out there has heard of smallpox? Smallpox is actually how vaccine technology emerged. The U.S., the United States, stopped having outbreaks in 1949, but smallpox was over 3,000 years old. It was thought that smallpox is what ended the Aztec civilization because it was brought from Spain to Mexico. There you go, travel again.
People to people.
People to people. What actually ended smallpox and created a lot of what we know about vaccines. So Edward Jenner in the 20th century discovered that by taking a small amount of pus from a woman with cowpox. So cowpox was similar, but not the same. So it wasn't as deadly. Smallpox is fatal. It was similar. So he inoculated a little boy with smallpox, and that helped him to recover. So in essence, because it was a cowpox, and Latin for cow is
Vacca.
VACCA, and that's how vaccinations came to be. So from there, that model of smallpox, which had previously been responsible for the death of 300 million people, allowed the smallpox vaccine to be created. And from that technology, vaccine technology has taken off. That is how measles, mumps, rubella, now chickenpox, polio. Polio, every summer, it would really scare all these families because they didn't know which kids were going to get it, and kids would get paralysis. Many kids died. And this was like the first half of the 20th century. Because I learned all this from that American Story book. Now we don't have it. And people tend to say, well, if I don't see it, why do I need the vaccine? Well, you don't see it because of the vaccine. That is exactly why. Right? The latest measles outbreak was 2019.
Yeah, and I was very much so a witness of that in Brooklyn. We saw one of the first cases.
Was it a vaccinated person, or how did that happen?
It was not a vaccinated person.
Did vaccinated people get infected?
We were able to shut that down real quickly. Okay. But it was a lot of unvaccinated people who were getting measles. Because that's like you're saying again, right?
Yeah.
It starts with somebody who's going to get it, who's going to get sick from somewhere, and they're not vaccinated. They don't have a protection, right? And if they live within a family, they're going to give it to their other family members. So I did see that where it was like somebody in a family that didn't have the vaccine got it from somewhere and infected other people in their family.
And enough people, usually if 80% of people get vaccinated, that's enough to have a vaccine herd immunity. So yes, people can get the disease even if you're vaccinated. Chances are lower you're going to get really sick with COVID. But if you're not coughing and sneezing and you may not spread it as much. That's temporary. And then for the permanent solution, if we shut down the spread enough, like we said, variants will not have anywhere to go as much anymore.
But that's basically how we shut down the measles outbreak. It didn't become a pandemic because we were able to vaccinate that population that were not vaccinated. And it was a very specific population of people who weren't vaccinated.
And the only way that was shut down was by vaccinating the people.
Exactly. Right? So that's the key word there is like they were vaccinated, and that's why you don't hear people getting measles anymore.
Exactly. That's why these outbreaks don't happen as much. As long as we have unvaccinated bodies, the viruses still have places to go. If you start shutting down restaurants in a city, people will go, they'll start knocking on the doors, or they'll find like a restaurant that is open, right? If 80% of the restaurants in that city are shut down, people are going to leave. Yeah. They're not going to have the strength. They have nowhere to eat. They're not going to be able to survive in that place anymore, right?
Yeah, I know, it's true.
You're getting vaccinated for the greater good. You're not just getting vaccinated for yourself. You're getting vaccinated, yes, for your friends and family, but you're getting vaccinated for the world so that this pandemic can end.
So how about we kind of go through some of the things that people have been saying in social media and kind of debunk some of the myths now that you've gone over the history of vaccines, what type of immunity exists, and why it's important to get vaccination, right? And some examples of some diseases that we've been able to eradicate because of vaccination. So some of the things that I've heard from patients are that they don't want to get this vaccine because it's a different type of vaccine. It's new technology, and they're scared about all these side effects that they're hearing about.
We had just went over the fact that we're all made up of DNA. Essentially, all viruses have DNA. Research in biotechnology and bioengineering genetics using that type of technology for medications and for vaccines has been going on for decades. That's not anything new. Prior to this COVID-19 outbreak, researchers had already been working on vaccines, looking at DNA technology and like a hybrid type of technology, like recombinant DNA. This is a very safe and effective type. It's an RNA. So DNA actually makes proteins. RNA, especially mRNA, is messenger RNA. So it's just sending a message to make something. So it's not like DNA going into your body. I think that's something else that people are worried about.
Yeah, they're afraid they're going to become the virus.
Right. Actually, since you bring that up, when a virus comes into your body, it actually takes over your cells, puts its DNA into your cells, and eventually that cell will die, which is what causes debris, etc. If you're worried about becoming the virus,
which I've heard, like you're going to be tagged.
Right. If you're worried about becoming the virus actually coming into your body and taking over your cells, which is what it does, is much more likely you to become the virus. No, you're not going to become the virus anyway.
Right.
You could die and the virus will leave your body. You won't become the virus. Like, it's not like a zombie apocalypse. But if you have a vaccine going into your body, it's much more protective. And I just want to clear up, because I know I said your immune system could overact, right, when you get infected. Your immune system with a little bit of the genetic material is going to give you just enough immunity.
So I think maybe some people are just confused about the fact that they keep hearing these like letters, mRNA vaccination versus the flu vaccine. So when we talked about the flu vaccine or like measles and mumps, rubella vaccine, those vaccines essentially are basically taking that virus, like taking the flu virus and like basically killing it. And that's what you're getting in your arm when you get the flu vaccine. You're getting like a killed version of the flu virus, right? The way
protein.
Exactly. So the way that your body responds to that, or your immune system responds to that, is by essentially thinking that you've already gotten sick with the flu. And so that if you do get exposed to the flu, you cough, somebody coughs into air and you breathe that in, your body might get a little bit of that virus into your nostril. But because you got vaccinated with the flu vaccine, you're not going to get as sick, right? Because your body is going to be able to mount the immune response to that as if you had already gotten sick to it, because it remembers the virus. People understand that, but then they don't understand how this technology works with mRNA. And I think that's part of the fear for people, is that they're like, this is some weird new vaccine way that they're doing. It's like manufactured in some lab, which, by the way, all vaccinations are manufactured in a lab.
All vaccinations and all medications are manufactured in a lab. And if you were to get sick with COVID, you're going to want medications. And medications have worse side effects and don't always work, and were manufactured in labs.
Right.
The new vaccine technology, which has been the goal. So like we said, coronaviruses have been around for a long time, and we did hear of SARS and MERS. They were already looking into vaccine technology. The main focus wasn't always the COVID vaccine because it didn't affect us in a pandemic sort of way. But then the focus went towards it. With the RNA, it is much more efficient to create RNA instead of making enough protein and making like a killed vaccination or working on getting enough of the actual virus. Right. You can make a lot more and faster, more efficiently if you take the little piece of genetic material. And that genetic material is, in essence, coding for the protein, because that's what DNA and RNA does, is make proteins, and that's what happens in our body every day. If you vaccinate somebody and they have a little RNA particle, it goes into the body and it makes a protein, and then it does exactly what another vaccine would do, what all the vaccines do.
Right. Which is create memory. It's So remember, so that your body responds to fight the virus. So that's, in a nutshell, one reason why a lot of people are still not getting the vaccine, right? Because they're kind of confused about this technology. So now that we've sort of cleared up what the difference is between like a flu vaccine and the COVID vaccine, the other things that I'm hearing are that people are getting reactions to the vaccine, right? And that's been all over the news. Some examples are it's going to affect your fertility. And then the other things I've heard of or have seen videos on social media are people putting magnets on their arms and they think they become magnetic because of the mRNA vaccine. Of course, they're talking about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine with the blood clots, but that's also a different type of vaccination. We should make that very clear to people that the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines are mRNA based and the Johnson & Johnson is an adenovirus based vaccination. So completely different.
Different technology.
So do you want to comment on those side effects of the vaccine? As far as like fertility, like if you get the vaccine, you're definitely not going to have children in the future. If you're 12 to 15, that's a lot of people's concern. And then the whole social media craze about being magnetic.
So I don't know where these come from because the researchers and the medical community never said any of this, considering the source of your information. You probably have more to say on this. What I'd like to say is when you research, you have to read peer-reviewed articles and you have to check what the World Health Organization or Center for Disease Control or the American Academy of Pediatrics in my area.
American Academy of Family Physicians or the Academy for Immunization.
That's people who have been in their labs and reading and researching, conducting this for a long time. So whoever comments on these type of things are not sources of medical truth. And they have no real proof because when research is conducted, you use thousands of people to conduct research to actually come up with pretty strong conclusions. You don't use one case here, one case there, because there's so many factors that could have caused something else. Your fertility for the future, we haven't gotten there yet. So people who've gotten their vaccine, we can't assess their fertility right now. So it's really impossible to prove something like that.
Well, I think that a lot of people in social media have such a huge platform, because it's easy to get on social media and spread quote unquote information, right? And not necessarily from, like you said, actual physicians or scientists that are publishing actual data. We don't know where these things are coming from, but I do know that our patients are listening to these things and they're watching these things. And for some reason, they still don't want to believe the person in front of them that has a medical degree, but they will believe the Instagram video that has a person who claims that they're a doctor and they're speaking in some sort of panel saying that this vaccination, there's a conspiracy theory behind it too, that like this is all just the government trying to control us and also track us. And like this vaccine is also a tracking device,
so
right?
There's no way to get a tracking device into a tiny lipid molecule or tiny piece of RNA that it does disintegrate. Like once it's in the body, creates the protein, it goes away. They can't track your blood that way. The best way to track people is to use a Maps app on your phone.
Yeah, if you want to get tracked, just have an Apple. Just have an iPhone.
Right. If you don't want to get tracked, then you should not be on, any kind of social media. You should not have a cell phone that has towers everywhere that always knows where you are.
Yeah.
Like, find my location. Bam. Done. Find my iPhone. Find my phone.
Exactly.
Done. There you are.
That is like such a valid point. How is the government going to track all these people's arms when they get vaccinated?
Like, it is so much easier to track somebody with an electronic device on them than to track them with anything you could possibly put into a tiny piece of liquid that's going into your body and building your immune system.
Now that we sort of kind of debunked a lot of these myths, the next thing that probably we should talk about are like the side effects, like when you get the vaccine. Right. So a lot of people are talking about how they're feeling, the different symptoms that they're having after the vaccine. I think it's important to talk about that so we can kind of reassure people. You and I both, we've been both vaccinated.
Yeah. I had the Moderna.
Yeah. And I had the Pfizer. So I got the Pfizer early on, which was in December.
Yeah. I got the Moderna in January, February.
And how did you feel when you got the vaccine?
I was happy because I felt like a little unwell that first night for the first vaccine. And then for the second vaccine, I felt like really like body aches, some chills for a day or two. And if I hadn't felt that way, I would have been nervous about whether my immune system did what it was supposed to do. When I had those symptoms, I was happy to know that my immune system had created an inflammatory response so that if I was ever exposed to the actual COVID-19 virus, my immune system would remember the virus and not get me sick.
Yeah, so for me, I had a different response, which was when I first got my first shot, I didn't feel anything. The only thing I had was like my arm just hurt.
Yeah, because a needle went into your muscle. So that is expected.
That's expected, but also that's also your body responding to it, right? You had similar response to you where you got body aches. Mine was just localized to my arm, right? It was just still sort of an inflammatory response. And then I felt like just tired for 5 days, but I didn't get any like body aches or anything like that. Just tired for 5 days.
Yeah.
And then my second shot, same thing. I think my arm felt worse in the second one. But just to preface this, every single year that I get my flu shot, it's the same reaction.
My arm
hurts for 2 days and I get tired for like a day or two. So it's just like you're saying, if you're not like, you're going to get some sort of reaction. And the most common one is the arm pain. It's the local reaction. And then some people do get, just so people know and are aware of it, people will get some fever, right? As if you're getting sick with like a cold or a flu. Some people might get swollen lymph nodes, which is just your immune system again responding. And that goes away within 24 to 48 hours.
Again, because when you do get sick, you feel similar to that because your immune system is fighting off an illness. This is how your immune system tends to make you feel when it's fighting the war.
Right. To me, those quote unquote side effects, I don't really think they're side effects. To me, it's just the vaccine working. I would rather have that than to feel what I witnessed during the pandemic to taking care of COVID patients. But I would rather have those 5 days of just feeling groggy and tired, which I feel like that all the time, versus somebody feeling like they're choking in their own body and they can't breathe and then have to get like a tube stuck down my throat to survive.
Yeah.
Right.
And then you're begging for help. You're begging for your life back.
Right.
And your family's watching you beg for air. And that's not any particular race or gender or age. It's just not the case.
Yeah.
It's anyone. It could happen to any of us, which is a terrifying thought.
Yeah. To me, I was excited about it. I was the first one that was like, please put it in my arm because I was taking care of COVID patients and I didn't want to get COVID, obviously, because of that, because I was exposed to it constantly. And so there was a moment where I was like, okay, yeah, I could be a little bit scared of the side effects, but just like with being sick with COVID, it's so unknown, like when you're going to turn and you're going to get sick. And I think that's worse. That it's worse, like having that feeling of like, this virus is in you and you're sick and you don't know when it's going to get really bad versus getting a vaccine in your arm and then being like, well, am I going to get a fever? Am I going to get body aches or am I going to get pain in my arm? Right?
Right. And I think we're in this situation now where we only have two choices because this virus is going to keep mutating and getting all sorts of different variants until it's done doing what it has to do. And that could be years and years. It just kills enough people where it has nowhere to go anymore.
Right.
We only have two choices. Choice 3 doesn't exist anymore, which is we just go back to normal and this never happened.
No.
That's not happening. It's either you're going to get the vaccine or you're probably going to get COVID. And when you get the vaccine, you could feel better and then be protected. But if you get COVID,
you don't know. There's so much unknown.
Know. You could lose your sense of taste and smell. I mean, even that alone should suck.
And also what's pretty unknown, like what people need to recognize is that people who did survive COVID, we're looking at more and more what we call sequelae from being really sick with COVID. Even just mild things just having like brain fog, feeling tired and fatigued all the time, losing their memory. I mean, I've seen a lot of people who got sick with COVID that are coming in a year and a few months later now and saying like, I still don't feel like myself. I still don't feel well. Right. So I just don't understand like why you would rather take that option, feeling not yourself, almost 2 years later to like feeling tired for 5 days,
right, you're
or
risking
feeling
like
2 days.
we don't know. It could do that post-viral fatigue that could last months and months. I've seen children have that for several months or 2 years with mono or with Lyme disease. You know, that actually does happen with viruses. It's a post-viral phenomenon. And we don't know if COVID does it. It probably does. It does everything else.
That and worse. Like we see it. We're seeing it now that it's worse than all that other post-viral syndrome we've seen in the past.
That's the other question people had, was why this vaccine came about so quickly and the mistrust with the vaccine. So part of it we had said was that we already had this in the works.
The technology was there for years already.
What happened was when this pandemic started, even prior to that, the pandemic wasn't even as bad as it was. It was 2019 when the scientists like jumped into their labs and were like, well, we better work on this technology we've been working on, but they amplified their work, focusing on it more. And because it was an emergency situation, so the focus and priority and investment and the time went into it that normally could have taken several years to decades. But because people really were all in need of this vaccine, that's why all the focus was on it. You know, any kind of red tape, all of that was not as much of an issue. So that's why they were able to go through those FDA approval phases quickly, and the phases of research and discovery, everything just happened quicker.
Yeah, I mean, they had clinical trials, right?
Yeah.
Both Pfizer and Moderna had actual people in these trials that were getting the vaccine when the pandemic started. So we saw it on TV, the first woman that got the vaccine.
The science part wasn't truncated.
Right.
The science part is 3 phases. There's phases of trials, right? So there's a research and discovery stage, which they had been doing and already did. They had done that
already, yeah.
And then they submitted their research, and then there's clinical stage. So there's research and discovery, then there's clinical. And in the clinical stage, there's 3 phases. And each phase requires a certain amount of people, whether it takes decades or months. It's the people and the study that matters. And that was all done. The world cooperated more, so it could be done faster.
The world cooperated because people were dying.
Right. So phase
people
1.
People were scared.
Phase 1, like 20 to 100 volunteers is the usual. They had that. Phase 2 is thousands. They had that. And phase 3 is thousands. You can see that Pfizer had used over 40,000 people for their phase 3. So enough people were studying. Enough studying was done.
I'm glad you're putting these numbers out there, because I think these are the things that people are not taking the time out to read and research. They're just watching TikTok and Instagram videos that give them nothing. No valid numbers, no actual data.
And if you want to read, Pfizer's research is available. Moderna's, they're available.
It's all public information. The ingredients in the vaccine are public information. I've looked at the ingredients of both.
I Googled it. And you can Google it. So if you're going to Google something, Google your actual question, and you can legitimately see what's on there. Because people have asked me, well, what's in it? We Google it. Bam.
Here it is.
Right. So if you're not going to trust anybody, trust your doctor, or else they should not be your doctor. Right. Don't go to a doctor you don't trust, please. There's many out there you can trust. And they will give you the correct information. Right. They're not going to steer you wrong. Or else they really shouldn't be your doctor. They just shouldn't.
Well, also, doctors would not be the first people that are getting the vaccine, right?
Right.
So I always kind of said that if all the physicians and the nurses were getting the vaccines and it really was not a good thing for us, then who was going to take care of all these sick people?
Right. We did it because we were exposed. And we don't want to get sick. And we don't want to get other patients sick by spreading it. You're absolutely right. Yeah. It doesn't make sense. Why did they give it to us first?
Yeah, why are we all lining up to get it?
Right.
While people were getting intubated, they were on ventilators. We're running out of ventilators. We were all running to get the vaccine, right? So if we all kind of just drop dead after the vaccine,
we're still here. We're still here and we're fine. We're still working. You're working this whole second wave or third wave, however you want to look at it. The other part that I just wanted to mention, that the HPV and hepatitis B vaccines, which have been around for decades, are also technology.
Yeah.
Forgive me, I don't know if it's RNA. Mary's going to look up these vaccines. While you're looking it up, I just wanted to point out another thing about not trusting the vaccine. But we do trust milk and eggs and stuff that, is being genetically engineered, unless you get organic and farm raised, and you're trusting the medications that are being used to treat COVID. People say, I'll take my chances. Okay, but if you get COVID, you're going to want the medication to treat COVID.
Yeah, and that's also another thing is like a lot of people are jumping on the fact that they want to take these like so-called medications that have not even been emergency approved or FDA approved. Remember when Plaquenil was a thing earlier on last year when everybody was getting this medication? They'd rather take a medication that's definitely not approved at all or even mildly approved to treat this virus, but not get the vaccine that has been researched.
And medications are very new, whereas vaccines are a very old technology.
Mm-hmm. And as you know, medications all have side effects.
I just wanted to say a word about children because people are worried about, children are going back into school, and some people really, really want to get their kids vaccinated. They cannot wait for this approval to happen, which hopefully they're saying the fall, winter, there'll be emergency approval for less than 12 years of age. Yeah. These are the kids that are going back into school and are going to be exposed to each other, and kids are getting much sicker now with these variants.
Yeah, and so, you may want to comment on that because now that school is back in session, like, what's your advice and sort of take on the mandates, also the mask mandates that people are getting upset about?
What masks do is they protect viral particles from being inhaled. Wearing a mask is going to protect you. School is where kids get sick. COVID-19 being around, kids could get sick from school. They're talking about rapid testing, so every kid gets a rapid test in school, and that way whoever is positive stays home, and then the positive cases are not in school infecting each other. And that is definitely helpful. Wearing a mask is definitely still necessary. Why not take that extra step of being protected? Instead of breathing particles to each other, if you do happen to have it, you're not breathing it out to people. And if somebody else happens to have it, you're not breathing it in. Let's protect our kids. Kids don't mind wearing a mask. In my experience, children are better about wearing their mask in the office appointment than their parents. I have to ask them to pull it down so I can check their throat, then they pull it right back up. They don't seem to have a problem with it. I think parents have more fears if their child has a problem with it, but that's what parents do. They get worried about their kids. They don't want their kids to feel any which way, but I think it's just much safer. And when the vaccine is available, get the vaccine and the problem will be much less of a problem.
I've also gotten that question of the mask wearing, like, if you're fully vaccinated, then why do you still wear a mask?
Well, because you could get the virus in your body and your immune system goes and recognizes it and doesn't allow it to get you terribly sick, but it still can spread. It may not go from your nose to your lungs, but it still goes to your nose and then out your nose when you breathe it. So yes, less particles, but particles are still there.
Yeah.
So when you are vaccinated, you are still spreading it. You're not spreading it as efficiently as somebody who's not vaccinated, but it's still a possibility. Additionally, you could still get sick with the vaccine.
Right.
You could get less sick. Until we get that herd immunity, people could actually still get very sick with the vaccine. That's why our choices affect each other.
Right. And so that brings me to my answer, which is I still wear a mask because I don't trust people.
That's why I wear a mask. Like, I don't know where you've been.
Yeah, because like you said, has to be a unified decision. Everybody has to be in on this, and not everyone is in on this with everything that we've just talked about, how people are spreading misinformation without evidence and still not getting vaccinated. And so, yes, I'm fully vaccinated and I don't wear a mask because I don't trust people. Because there are people out there who are not vaccinated, and they're the ones that are not wearing masks,
right? That
are coughing into the air. Because I did my due diligence, I will not get sick because of you.
Think about this. The United States is about, 70% vaccinated, age 12 and older now.
Right.
I see over 90% of people not wearing a mask. So we can't trust the people that are not vaccinated, not wearing a mask.
Right.
So the best thing you can do for yourself and for your society and your loved ones is wear the mask until we really are at a place where we're not seeing this anymore.
Yeah, and the reason why we're seeing these new variants coming out is because, like you said, it goes back to the idea that we're not have reached that immunity yet.
Yeah, we're not there yet.
We're not there because people are
not
getting vaccinated.
Right.
Because people are not being team players.
Yeah, it is about being a team player, because when we talk about the fact that people say this is unconstitutional or I have rights, then you're talking about America, right? what do Americans do? We're patriots.
Right.
The most patriotic thing you can do is fight for your country. The most patriotic fight you can do is fight this pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So wear the mask for everybody else.
Right.
Not just because it's uncomfortable for you or your whole family's vaccinated. Wear the mask because in the grand scheme of things, we can get that herd immunity.
And it's just being about not being selfish. And it all goes back to, like, I remember posting on social media why I got vaccinated, right? And it wasn't because it was like a selfish thing for me. It was because I wanted to protect my family, protect my patients, right? The people that I was seeing in the clinic that were not necessarily sick with COVID. So that's why I got vaccinated. It was because I was not being selfish, because I wanted to protect other people. So it goes back to that, being a team player in that sense that, like, you're just trying to help other people for the greater good.
We're doing it for the greater good. You have to think about the greater good because no man is an island. We are all connected. We need each other. We need the restaurants. We need the stores. We need the services. You need the cops. You need the lawyers. You need the teachers. You need your friends. You need society.
Yeah, and this is why things are closing.
Right. And it's so depressing to just sit at home. So if we are going to need everyone, and everyone needs us, then we need to do what we all need to do. We all can band together against this virus. Mm-hmm. The sad thing is that a few people will die fighting, right? Mm-hmm. So people have died. Not a few people. A lot of people will die fighting.
Yeah, right. And so, just to answer your question, hepatitis B and Gardasil are both recombinant vaccines.
They're the similar technology, but this is actually, the RNA technology is actually more effective, I believe.
Mm-hmm. It's very similar because it's all based on the surface protein, which is what the mRNA is coding for on the surface and coding for the most potent part of the virus. But you're not getting the actual COVID virus. And then I've heard people ask me, like, well, why don't they just insert the COVID virus into you?
Well, you mentioned this is actually great. I'm glad you mentioned it because, like we said, RNA is a message for a protein to be created. So you'll never get the entire virus particle in you because it's only a protein that your immune system just has to recognize a surface protein. It doesn't have to recognize the entire virus. So that's actually better. We never have to get that whole stupid virus in us. It's just a protein that codes for it that cannot do damage on its own. The surface protein can't do damage. The actual virus can.
And that's a good point. I want people to listen to that because that's exactly what people are saying, is that they think that this is worse. This is a worse type of vaccine because it's something unknown to them. So I'm glad that you made that point. That surface protein is not as...
It's not a dead virus. It's not a live virus. It's no virus at all. It's a protein that has no ability to do anything to you. But your body will have the immune reaction nonetheless. Your body has the reaction that it needs to fight the virus without actually having the virus. It's actually a beautiful thing.
It is beautiful, because we're geeks, we're science geeks. We get excited about things like this.
But we want everybody to get excited with us. This is exciting. We have a means to an end. If we can just do it, we can fight this. And, other countries are going to keep getting variants too. We can send the vaccine technology to them and they can vaccinate more people. We're actually lucky to live in a country which wants to vaccinate its citizens. There are so many countries that there's millions of people that can't get to the hospital, that can't get to the clinic, they don't have access the way we do. Our vaccines are completely free. You just walk into your local pharmacy and you're done.
Yeah, and I would really love to comment on that because this is a conversation I've been having. The fact that there's so many Americans who are quote-unquote anti-vaxxers and they're so against the mask mandates and against the mandates now. Like, let's talk about, like you said, let's talk about the other countries outside of America. For example, the Philippines, very poor third world country. Half of the population, more than half the population, because they're poor, are not vaccinated because you have to have a lot of money to get that vaccine in the Philippines.
Yeah.
Right? So only the people...
India's the exact same way.
Exactly. If you have money, you'll get vaccinated. If not, then you're basically SOL. You might get COVID and die.
Yeah.
And so why is it we're sitting here in this country and, like you said, you can walk in anywhere and they will give you the vaccine. They don't ask you anything. right? You can even get tested for the COVID antigen and PCR the same day if you want it.
Yeah,
The two
you can
tests for
buy
free.
the test too.
Yeah.
At home, do it at home.
Yeah. And yet people here are saying no to that when there's people in other countries who literally would die, give their blood, anything to get that vaccine. You all need to think about that and put that into perspective.
Yeah, put into perspective what's happening. We're actually so fortunate that we have so much available health.
We have freedom. That's what we do. We have freedom to live because there's people in other countries who don't have freedom
Right.
to live because they don't have the freedom to access this vaccine for free.
That's a really good point. We're talking about freedom. You're free to walk into a pharmacy and protect yourself and your family.
Right.
That is freedom.
Yeah.
Or if you're sick, walk into an ER and get treated. You can't get turned away. That's a lot of freedom.
When you hear those excuses about people saying, no, it's my right and I have freedom to say no, let's think about another person, another part of the world that would actually like jump you to get that vaccine that you don't want.
And jump you. There's one article I read in the New York Times, just a little tidbit, because now the children are going to be a big issue with this. So the thought was that, yes, children have been hospitalized with the COVID vaccine when they've done studies on less than 17 years old. But it was brief and uneventful, whereas children with actual COVID hospitalized much more serious in the ICU. The thought is if you were to get every single 73 million children vaccinated versus not vaccinated, with the vaccine, based on how many got hospitalized, you would have over about 7,700 hospitalized. Without the vaccine, you get over 14,000 hospitalized. So considering what COVID would get, over 14,000 kids hospitalized with potentially a serious illness versus getting the COVID vaccine and being hospitalized due to the vaccine or something else, you're about half that, and it would be brief and uneventful. So again, your risk versus benefits here with getting the vaccine versus not. And that's just for children, but of course that could be used, for adults too. Just getting vaccinated versus not.
Yeah.
So I guess we could wrap up just by saying, if you can get vaccinated, please do. All the evidence is there. If you can continue to wear your mask, please do, because it's protective. It just is.
I just want to end by saying that I think we understand like what everyone has gone through, and I think that all the emotions and everything that us as physicians, we've felt what this pandemic has done, and we understand the public and your concerns. At the same time, going back to the idea of wanting freedom and keeping freedom intact, I also think that that's the goal, right? Our goal is to get out of this pandemic and essentially get your freedom back, freedom to be outside without having to be fearful that you're going to get sick and end up in the hospital. And so I do think that if that's the end goal, which is having our freedom back to live the life that we had before 2020, this is one way we're going to get there, right? And we haven't gotten there yet because there are people who are resistant to that. And if this is where we want to be in 2 years, back in 2019, 2018, this is the only way we're going to get there, is if you continue to wear your mask, hopefully say yes to the vaccine, and you'll get your freedom back.
Perfectly said. Well, thank you so much.